God, you're so good. One more time. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. You're so good to me.
Well, we have a big crowd here tonight, and I don't know whether to be excited or really, really nervous. Um, I want, how about both, he said. I want to share with you, first of all, my story, and it may be long and boring, but I want you to hear my story and know how I got here so that we can figure out how we got here to this place where we have this decision to make. The Lord called me into the ministry when I was 30. Previously, I had worked in construction. I had my own business, and I did things that I could do by myself. I liked working by myself because that's just kind of me, so sorry. But I did that for a good long while. I had put some time into college, but I'll just be honest with you, when my first year there at Union, I went and I had already taken college prep. I'd gone through all of those things in high school, and I'd already taken 4 years of foreign language, 4 years of English, science, math, history, all of those things. And then I went to college and they signed me up for English and science and history and all that stuff. And I didn't have a calling on my life at that age. I didn't really know what I was going to do. And I remember at the end of the year, my algebra professor asked me to come into his office, and he said, "I don't understand why your grades are not better." He said, we tested you at the beginning of the year, and you understand all the concepts. I said, "Yes, I'm bored." I was like, "This is boring." And I just thought, I don't want to pay money to keep doing something that I've already done. So I decided to go to technical school and take architectural drafting, and I did that for 1 year and finished that up, and I immediately went to work for Clearview Plastics Corporation in their engineering department. I ended up actually doing 3 jobs at that place. I worked for the engineering department, I worked in the marketing department making samples for our sales rep, and I also worked in the graphic design department. So I had 3 jobs before it was over with, because every time they'd give me a new job I just love to work, okay? So I would get my work done, and then they'd come and fuss at me and say, "Well, you look like you don't have enough to do, so we'll give you another job." And so I ended up with 3 jobs. So I like to work. People sometimes pick at me and they say you do too much, but I'm sorry, I just am not a person who can sit idle. You can even see that right now I've just got, my fingers are going like they're trying to do something. So when I was 30, the Lord called me to the ministry. I had a good business going. My wife and I lived in North Jackson. We had 3 kids, and we were excited and just enjoying our lives together. And the Lord called me into the music ministry, and I knew this. And my wife knew it at the same time. And when I mentioned it to her, she said, "Yeah, I already knew that was something God was doing in your life." So everything that he's ever talked to me about, he talks to her. We always know what's going on in each other's lives. We always know what God is doing with us. And so at that time, we were members of a very large church in Jackson, and we were enjoying just serving there. I was in all 3 worship services, in the choir. I was in the praise team. We were involved in Sunday school and teaching VBS and just everything we could get involved in. And so the Lord called me to the music ministry. Long story short, I was working in a house one day, and I encountered this guy who was in there, another tradesman doing a different job, and I recognized him from Union from 12 years earlier. He didn't know me, but I recognized him and even remembered his name. And so I walked up to him and I called him by name, and he said, "Do I know you?" I said, "Well, you probably don't." I said, "But I remember you. We were at Union together back in such and such." And he said, "Oh, okay." And so we struck up a conversation, and come to find out that he was serving at a small church here in Jackson, Tennessee. He was not the pastor, but he was one of the lay leaders. And so he just began to tell me that they were praying for God to send somebody to be a worship leader. It wasn't a paid position, but they were praying for somebody to come and take over their praise team and help them get organized and move into that direction. And I said, well, it's kind of interesting that God brought us together after 12 years because God has called me into the music ministry, and I'm waiting to see where God wants me to go. Now, I had a lot of good, well-meaning people in my life who were telling me how to get into the ministry, okay? And I didn't agree with everything that I was being told. I just didn't feel that that was the way God was moving me. I felt that God was going to tell me what he wanted me to do. And that's based on the fact that all my life God has talked to me and told me things that he wanted me to do. Now, my stepmother told me one time, she said, John, God doesn't talk to everybody exactly the way he does to you. You need to understand that. I said, yes, ma'am, but God is very direct with me. He tells me very direct things. I don't hear his voice, but he speaks to me. And so God had very clearly said, I'm calling you to the ministry. Ignore all of this advice. Don't throw resumes out there. That's not how I want you to do this. I'll lead you. And he led me to this man, and we ended up spending several years there in ministry in that church. And it was a very pleasant, very positive time. And I had a very good pastor there who I still keep up with, and he was a very good man and very encouraging to me. But I knew that after some time, God was calling me to full-time ministry. And I had some people advising me how to make that happen. And I did not agree with that. I felt that God would send me where he wanted me to go when the time was right. I was told that I was crazy for thinking that kind of thought process. I was told that I needed to throw resumes all over the country and just see what would stick. And I didn't do that. But I had a moment of weakness where I had some criticism of just how I was handling things. And I just kind of stomped my foot and I thought, well, doggone it, I'm just going to show them I can get me a job. And so I put together a resume and I found 9 churches through the SBC website that I was willing to send a resume to. I didn't expect to hear anything from them because I was told you have to send out 200 or 300 resumes. Okay, back then, this was 20-something years ago, back then we didn't have the shortage that we have today, okay? So we had a lot of opportunities, but churches had their pick is what I was trying to say. Well, I had 5 churches that called me almost immediately that week that wanted to interview me, and I let the Lord lead me to the one that I felt was the one I was supposed to go to. Now, I'm going to stand here and tell you that I stepped outside of God's will because I had decided that I was going to go and take the advice and go find a job, find a ministry position instead of waiting for the Lord, okay? But in spite of that, God picked a place and sent me somewhere and went with me even in my disobedience, okay? Are y'all understanding me? I'm telling you, that was a mistake in my life. So when I tell you I don't want to step outside of God's will, it's because I went and I got taken to the woodshed, okay? So I went and we spent about 16 months in another church in another state. And let me just tell you very briefly, it was not altogether a bad situation, but we did step into a bit of a hornet's nest. I did not know that going in, and the search committee did not tell me the problems that they were experiencing. They didn't tell me. They told me later, we hoped when we hired you and brought you in, it would get better. But they said, we're sorry. We should have let you know what was coming in. And I said to them, well, I should have waited on the Lord and let him take care of me instead of coming and finding a place to go. But God was with me. We spent the first few months trying to sell our house, so Angela and the children were here. I was going back and forth and spending my weeks up there and working. I'd come home for a couple of days and then go back on Saturday night. And so finally, when the house sold and we were able to rent a house, I had my checkbook out. I was there in the house with the landlady, and I was writing out a check for the amount, for the deposit, and for the first month's rent. And I wrote down the date for the check, and it was July the 15th. And God spoke to me and said, you are going to be here 1 year. And I thought, does he mean I'm going to be in this house for 1 year or in this state for 1 year? I kind of felt like he was saying this position for 1 year. Of course, I'd already been there for several months. So long story short, this is a pastor. I loved him, and I tried my very best to honor him in every way that I possibly could. But he told us he was not called to the ministry. He said that he had something else he wanted to do with his life, and that didn't work, and so he decided to go to seminary and become a pastor. And so, long story short, it was kind of a difficult situation, and that's what the church was going through. That's what I walked into. And so when I made out my letter of resignation, I happened to write it out on my computer, and I got ready, and I realized I haven't dated it, and I looked at my calendar, and it was July 15th. And I said, oh, Lord, you told me I was going to be here for 1 year. And so I submitted my resume, and I gave my notice, and we packed our stuff up. We got the biggest U-Haul that we could get, and we packed all of our things up, and we came back to Tennessee. I'm very happy to be back here. And I told the Lord, and I've said it many times to myself, I'll never step outside of his will again deliberately. I will never do that again. I'm going to do exactly what he tells me to do, no matter how long it takes. I'm going to be patient. If he's patient with me, I can be patient with him. And so we didn't really know where we were supposed to go or what we were supposed to do. We didn't know where we were going to go back and live in Jackson. Where are we going to be? And so I've shared this story with you, and I will not go into great detail about it, but long story short, I had a conversation with the Lord one day, and he told me to build your house in Henderson. And so I went back and talked to my wife, and she didn't believe me. She didn't think that was a good idea because I had said I didn't want to live in a small town. But you know, I say things sometimes anyway. God was telling me this is where you're going to be. And long story short, yes, that turned out to be a great thing. We found her father actually owned some property. And we decided we would ask him if he wanted to sell a couple of acres to us. He said, it's going to be yours when I die anyway. I'm going to go ahead and give you 2. And then we inherited 2 more. So we have 4 acres. That's why we have animals and all that stuff. But God spoke to me when he told me to build my house there. And he said, this is where I'm going to plant you and this is where you're going to stay. Because when he asked me, what is your heart's desire? I said, Lord, I just want to go somewhere where you will put me and I can serve you, and we can just be happy and content. I don't want to move around. I don't want to do that anymore, okay? And so that's why he told me to go here. Jerry helped me build the house. My father helped me build the house. We just kind of made it all just sort of I don't know what you would call it. The kids even helped us paint. I mean, they were just little, but we've been there for 18 years now, and that's the longest we've ever stayed anywhere. So in the midst of preparing to build this house, my wife and I found an ad in the Thrifty Nickel there in North Mississippi where we were staying, and it was for a building, a church building. This church had built a new building, and they wanted the old one gone, but they didn't want to just doze it. They wanted somebody who would take it and use it, and they sold it to me for $200. And so Angela and I began the process, and my sister was helping some, and my dad came up and helped some, but we went through this process. It took us 5 months to take this building apart. And if you ever come to my house, you can see it. It's in the ceiling, some of it's hidden, it's in the walls, it's in the floors. The floors in our house are the old wood floors that were in the sanctuary of that building, and they still have the little high heel marks in there. And Angela said, don't sand those out, that means something, that's neat. So our house looks old even though it's not. So we did all of this, and in the midst of that process, my mother died, and we took some time off to go help my dad get his affairs sorted. And then by the time we got back to getting ready to build our house, my wife had been invited to submit a resume to First Baptist Henderson as children's minister, and she felt called into the ministry. And so they were talking to her, and I remember very distinctly, it's the first time I met that sweet lady right there because she was the church pianist, and I had been invited by the minister of music, who was a friend of mine from high school, to come and sing. Angela had not actually had the position yet. They just had her resume, but he asked me if I would come and sing, and so I came. And she graciously let me play the offertory, and I don't know if you remember that or not. And then I played Praise the Lord, that song that I love. You've heard me sing it many times. And when I sat down at that piano in that sanctuary, the Lord spoke to me again and said, you're going to be the worship leader in this church. And I didn't tell anybody that. I didn't even tell Angela that right then, because I was kind of thinking, okay, well, that's interesting because they have a music minister. But I thought, okay, but I put that in the back of my mind. And so a few years later, when he resigned and moved on, I became interim and eventually became the Minister of Music, Education, and Outreach. So Angela and I were there for a total of 5 years. I turned 40 there that fall before I left that church in February. I knew when I turned 40 that God was calling me to be a pastor. I did not know how that was going to come about because I really liked where I was. And I was very happy where I was. And I had no intention of leaving there. But, and y'all forgive me, I'm not trying to be critical, but I want you to know, okay? This is the pastor that we had, the new pastor, and I loved him, and I did everything I could to honor him as best I could. But this is the gentleman that you've heard me say who said, I know what the Bible says, but that's not how we're going to do it here, okay? So you can understand why that didn't go really well. So come February of 2009, I found myself without a position, and my wife as well. So I just began to pray, and I was quite devastated, I'll be honest with you, because I had loved that place and had no intention of ever leaving. But I also realized, you know what? If God's calling me to pastor, then this maybe is his way of moving me somewhere else. And so that fall, I was invited to preach at Keeling Baptist Church, which is in Stanton, Tennessee. It is right across the street from this new mega site that you keep hearing about in the news. But before then, it was like out in the middle of nowhere. But I grew up in Haywood County, and so I kind of felt like that was like a good place to go home. And I spent 4 or 5 years there, and I loved it. They were good people, and they were very kind to me. They ordained me into the gospel ministry. They gave me this Bible that means so much to me. This is so sentimental to me because it has their names in it. These are the people who just took me in as somebody who'd only preached 3 or 4 sermons in his entire life, and they brought me in and let me come there. And I preached there 2 Sundays in October. And then in January, I got another call from them. And they said, our pastor just resigned. He's going to Middle Tennessee. Would you come and fill in for us? And so I went to fill in for them and never left. I stayed there for a while. They made me interim. And then after a few months, they said, would you just be our pastor? We would just love for you to be our pastor. And I said, I would love to do it. At the time, I was bivocational because I had left full-time ministry after First Henderson. And so I was working at Pig Sweet, which is in Bells, and I would drive from there on Wednesday night over to Stanton, and we would do church. And Sunday morning, me and the kids and Angela would pile up, and we would drive over there. And it was a good drive, yes, but we were very happy to do it and enjoyed it and had a great time in the ministry. And the Lord blessed me immensely through those people. But God was speaking. I told y'all this was going to be long and boring, okay, but I want you to know the whole story. I knew that God was not going to let me move over there and stay there because he had told me this is your place right here. This is it. And so I was patiently waiting, and I knew that God was going to send me somewhere, and I just began to look and just keep my eyes open and see where is it that God would have me to go. And I knew of 2 churches here that I felt interested in, and one particular church that I actually felt really strongly pulled to. And so this would have been late 2012. And my wife and I actually, after talking about it, praying about it, we got in the car one night and we drove and we parked right there in that parking lot. Now, this was 6 years before y'all met me, but we sat right there and we prayed, and when we left here, we both said, this is the church God's calling us to. And so I brought a resume and put it in the hands of Miss Linda Young, and I just left it to the Lord. Now, this church decided to go in a different direction, which is fine, and God opened a door for me in Pinson. I wasn't interested in Pinson, didn't even know where that church was. I'd heard of it, but I didn't even know where it was. And somehow, Brother Ronnie Wilburn had found a resume of mine and had sent it to them because he was their interim. And he said, I think you ought to talk to this guy. So Dennis's brother was on that committee. He called me, and that's when I met them. And I ended up feeling called and led to go there. I didn't understand exactly what all God was doing, but I knew that God was saying, this is the door I have opened for you, go. But before I did that, I went to my church at Keeling. Before I went and preached at Pinson, I went before my church at Keeling, and I told them what God was doing in my life. And I know that's unconventional. Usually you go and you get the other church and you get that voted on, and then you go back and tell your other church. But I'm sorry, I'm weird. I just feel like if it's God's will, all of God's people can know about it. And so that was a very difficult Sunday to tell them, I feel like God is calling me back to there, but I want your blessing. And we had the invitation, and I stood right there. And I remember Miss Betty Colston was the first one that was sitting in the back, and she walked down there and she was crying because I had gotten so close to these people. And she came in and she took my hand. She said, Brother John, I release you. And they came one at a time. They just came down the aisle, almost everybody in that church. And every one of them just came, we'll give you our blessing, we'll be praying for you. So the next Sunday, I went to Pinson and I preached a trial sermon, and I was relieved to know that my family back at Keeling was praying for me, and I was relieved that I could tell the people at Pinson, you don't have to keep this a secret because my church is praying for you right now. And they thought I was crazy. Brother Butch, they just said, you're just nuts. But they hired me anyway for some reason. And so I left Keeling with very warm friendships. And I went to Pinson, and I spent 5 years at Pinson. I had my heart attack in 2016, and I never quite got back to normal. And you and I know now why there was some damage done by the angioplasty, but I did not know that. The doctors did not know that. So I just knew things were not going well. But 4.5 years into it, the Lord spoke to me, and he said, your work here is done. Give them 6 months' notice, and then you'll be out of here at your 5-year anniversary. And so I did that at the end of December. I gave them my 6-month notice. I explained to them that I was leaving. I was not mad. And in fact, I didn't leave the church when I finished preaching. I was still there teaching Sunday school, doing the things, because God had not told me to leave that church. He had just said, you're done as their pastor. So I did. I left. I quit. I stepped down, finished out my 6 months because I wanted them to have plenty of time to find somebody else to replace me. And so after I preached my last sermon there, I think it was less than 2 weeks later that I got a phone call from Miss Peggy Hamilton. Now, I've known her for a long time because she and my mom were friends, and we sometimes talk back and forth, but we don't talk frequently. But I came home from work, and Angela said, Miss Peggy Hamilton called for you. She didn't have your cell phone number, but she had mine. And she said, I don't know why she would be calling you. We don't talk to them that often. I said, I know exactly why she's calling, because I had gotten an email from someone else telling me about this position here for worship leader. And I had said, I'm not really looking right now. I'm kind of tired, and I've enjoyed what I've done, but I'm not really looking for somewhere to go. And so I had emailed this person back and said, thank you for letting me know about that, but I don't think I'm really interested in that. And then Miss Peggy calls and she says, would you be interested in applying for this position? We're looking for somebody, and our committee has kind of come up short. They just keep saying, we can't find anybody. And I kind of took a deep breath and I said, oh, Lord, you have to speak through Miss Peggy. But anyway, I kind of told her, yes, I would call and I would speak to the committee and talk to them. I said, I'd be willing to call and talk to them. But I didn't think that was something that I wanted to do. I don't know why, I just didn't. But I called Miss Judy Laster and I talked to her, and she said, well, we're just kind of at that point where we've thrown our hands up because everything we've looked through 1,000 resumes and we've talked to people and we can't find anybody that will come for what we want to pay or anybody that's willing to come, and we're just kind of like, Lord, we need somebody. And I just kind of like, well, Lord, maybe this is you speaking. And so I ended up meeting with them, talking to them, met with Dr. Sims, and the Lord was telling me, this is where you're supposed to go. I argued with him a little bit. It had nothing to do with this church. It was just I was arguing with him a little bit because I had not completely recovered like I thought I was supposed to. And I was kind of just thinking, maybe I'm just supposed to take a break. I don't know. I just wasn't sure. But I said, Lord, if this is something you want me to do, you've got to point it out to me. Well, he pointed it out to me very, very, very graciously, because when I met with the committee, 4 of the 5 already had some story where somehow they knew me or something about me and had been told about me, and we just came to the conclusion this was of the Lord. And so I have enjoyed my time here. So I came here in September of 2018. And then, of course, you all realize by September of 2019, that's when I was starting to this was really starting to have an effect on me, and we knew I had to have surgery. And now that's all behind me, and I'm very happy for that. And I'm gracious that you all helped me through that. And please forgive me. I know this is long. I just want you to know the whole story. I want you to know everything about how I got here. I have enjoyed this time in my ministry more than any time in the last 23 years. I have enjoyed it more than any church work I've done in my 53 years. I have been happier here. My daughter, my other children, my wife, they can tell you, I have never been as happy as I have been with you all the last 3.5 years, almost 4. And so this has been a delight. So how did we get to this point? Well, Dr. Sims resigned in September, but the September before that, 1 year before he resigned, I had started a life group class. We were doing it online at the time only, and I was in my office one day working on my lesson, and the Lord spoke to me, and he said, you're going to preach again soon, be prepared. And I said, okay, and I kind of put that back here. I know I spoke to Hannah about it, and I kind of vaguely mentioned it to Angela, but I just kind of put it in the back of my mind and just left it there. And so when Dr. Sims resigned, I did not know before that Sunday that he was going to, but I was not surprised, because I felt that if God was telling me to be prepared to preach, it was because Dr. Sims was going to be going somewhere else. And I haven't talked to him much, but I think he's quite happy where he is, and I'm happy for him because he's a good man, and he treated me extraordinarily well in the time that I was here. Now, he was a good fella, and I'll just tell you, I never told him no. If he asked me to do anything, if there was any way I could do it, I did it for him because he treated me well, and I loved him very much, and I know you all did as well. But I was not surprised when he left, okay? And so I went to our deacons, because our deacons had the responsibility of filling the pulpit until we could find an interim. Our personnel committee was responsible for finding an interim. And I went to the deacon body and I said, if you would like for me to fill the pulpit, I would be happy to do that. It's actually in my job description. And they said, yes, we would like for you to do that. And that will take a little bit of a load off of us. And so I said, well, let's set for 6 weeks. That way, if the personnel committee finds someone sooner, that's fine. But you at least have 6 weeks. You don't have to try and find someone to fill the pulpit. I went to our personnel committee. And I said, you all have the responsibility of finding an interim. I would be willing to serve in that position. If you would like for me to, I'd be happy to do that. And so they said, well, we kind of think we would. They had already done some preliminary work, but kind of come to the conclusion that might be a good idea. And I said, well, let's wait a few weeks. And if you still feel this way later, and if the church feels that way, then we'll go ahead and make it official. And so we did that. And so that's how we got to where we are. And then in the course of things, we managed to put together a pastor search committee. And I believed in my heart that God had called me to pastor this church. I believed it actually in 2012. And I believed that God was preparing me and bringing me here. And he brought me here under a different position, but I believed that this is what I was called to do. I didn't push that because I wanted to work through it in my own mind. I mean, I knew this is what God was telling me, but I also wanted to make sure mentally and emotionally that I was on board. And God was very gracious to be patient with me. And so we've been through, what, has it been 8 months, almost 9, something like that we've been through this process. I would like to put Miss Jackie on the spot for just a moment. Do you have a total number of resumes that you all went through or received?
There was at least 50.
At least 50, okay. They did work, okay. They did not just come to me and say, hey, we're going to just hire you. No, they went through the process, which is what I wanted them to do, which is what I wanted the church to do. And they did go through that process, okay? One of those 50 was my resume. I did feel convicted to put that before them and let them make that decision. Let me go ahead and say a few things that might sort of preempt some questions that some of you might have. I've had some people say, well, where's your degree from? I don't have a degree. I have been studying for 30 years. I have been studying all my life. I have taken a lot of courses and a lot of college classes. I did not take all of the English and all the other things that I needed to do to get a degree. And some people would criticize me for that. And some people would say, well, you're not educated. Well, I think I'm actually very well educated, but I would say that I'm self-educated. I've taken a lot of classes. I went through Union and I went through Liberty University, and I took Old Testament survey and New Testament survey, and I took psychology because I thought understanding how the brain works might be helpful to understanding people. I took literature, even though I had always done well in literature, but I just took it because I wanted to brush up on my writing skills. Because at that time I was in the process of writing a book, which I completed, and that's been published. I took all kinds of theology classes, basic theology, advanced theology, and all those things. And I took all of the things that I thought would be useful to teach me how to teach the Bible. Okay? I did not take all of the other classes that I had to take to complete a degree. I just did not want to waste my time or my money. I'm still paying school loans on what I did, okay? So y'all, some of you are nodding your heads, you know what that's about. So I am not anti-education. In fact, I feel like my calling is, my gift is understanding the Word of God. My calling is to teach it to people. One of the things that I have experienced in the years that I have been preaching, and I'm not patting myself on the back, I'm just telling you this is what God has affirmed in me. I have had people who have been in church for decades who've walked up to me and said, I've learned more about the Bible. I understand it more under your preaching than I did in the last 40 years of anything. And so I feel that's just God's affirming that this is the gift He has given me to understand it and to help other people understand it, make sense of it. I am very much into education. As I said, I've completed one book. It hasn't sold a lot. It's on Amazon and christianbook.com, but it's a basic book that is to explain theology to the average church member, just how the big picture works. I have 2 other books that I want to complete that I think would be useful. So I'm very much into education. But I did not take the conventional route that other people do. I don't have the letters and the things behind my name because that doesn't matter to me. That's not important to me. It may be important to other people. I understand that. But this is the choice that I made based on what I felt God was telling me to do. And so I have tried to use my resources, and I am a voracious reader. I read a lot, and I love the old school theologians. I love the H.A. Ironsides. I love the Spurgeons. I love those books. and I read them and I dissect them. And the classes that I did take, I never sold any of my books back. I kept them and I read them cover to cover and cover to cover and cover to cover, because you know when you take a class, you only cover maybe 25% of the textbook. And I was like, no, that's not enough for me. I don't want to write 10 papers and I want the whole thing. I want to study it, dissect it, and I still do that. I guess I've shared about as much as I can share and as much as your minds might be willing to tolerate. So I'm going to open up the floor and ask you, do you have any questions of me? And I don't care what it is, because I'm an open book. Yes, sir.
Currently, what are your immediate plans for church growth?
Good question. I actually am glad you brought that up, because I wanted to address that. Something that I had planned for tonight, and I can't even find my notes, they're in here somewhere. This is what I had planned to preach to you tonight before I knew we were going to do this tonight. And I'm kind of glad, because this is kind of like my heart, actually. Some of you have been here a lot longer than I have. I want you to think back 10 years ago. I want you to think 2022, go back to 2012. And I want you to think about all of the church members who used to be here, who used to be active, serving and working, who have either passed away or reached a point in their life where they're physically not able to come and work anymore. I know there was one year before I came, I know Miss Sadie has told me there was one year you all had 24 funerals. So I'm going to guess that if you were to count up the number of people we've lost in the last 10 years, I think it would be 50 or more probably. Is that a reasonable thing to say? Okay, I don't have an exact number, but I think that would be a reasonable thing to say. So I want you to, I'm not trying to be depressing. I just want you to understand, when I look at the church, I look at it analytically, okay? I look at it with my heart, but I also look at it with my brain. And I also look at and I think, what about the next 10 years? Okay? How many of you in here are 60 or older, if you're willing to say? Okay, I'm not trying to embarrass anybody, but I'm just saying our church, generally speaking, skews older, okay? And you know we've lost a lot of people in the last 10 years. So I'm not saying raise your hand on this one, but how many of you think that in the next 10 years, you may have either passed away or gotten to a point where you cannot be here doing what you're doing right now? Would you be willing to raise your hand and say, okay, if you look around, that's quite a lot of people. And that's not counting those of us who are younger and could have a heart attack and drop dead today. I'm not trying to be morbid. I'm just saying, Miles, when I look at it from who will replace the ones who pass on, who will replace them. We have to have young people here. We have a youth and children's minister that I love very dearly. She'll be the first one to tell you she's not perfect, and I'm the first one to tell you I'm not perfect. We work very well together. We love each other. We get along well together. First of all, that's rare in church, just to have staff that love each other and get along. And of course, you know, I love Miss Sadie and I love Miss Mona, and I'm glad that she's here, because she just, it just works. And even that, where did that fella go? Right over there. You know, him coming in to help us with worship, he just folds right in, okay? We absolutely have to put effort into those kids. We have them here on Wednesday night. Now, next Sunday night, she's going to have snack, am I right? And she's going to have them in here next Sunday night. And so we might be just a little more upbeat than we normally are, but don't let that bother you. You know, walk in here and you see those kids, go up to them and say, hey, I'm so glad you're here. They may be a little bit socially awkward. They may not know how to talk back to you. This is a strange kind of environment. This formality is odd to them, okay? So keep that in mind. We've got to somehow integrate them into the other aspects of the church so that they can be raised up. Second thing that we have to do is we've got to literally be on our knees praying. We've got to pray because we need people who will come in and replenish the harvest work. We need people who will be raised up. We need to see people come to Christ, and we need to mentor them. And I've shared this before. One of the things that I've shared about education, up until the last 100 years, the way we prepared pastors was we mentored them inside the church. We raised them up in the church and prepared them for that. And we don't do that in churches anymore, but we need to be doing that and raising up Sunday school teachers and deacons and all of those things. Okay, so that requires outreach, Miles. Okay, and that's part of my job anyway already is outreach. Now, I've served under, not Dr. Sims, but I've served under two other pastors where I was outreach minister, and they both told me, that's not my thing, that's your thing. I don't see that. I think the pastor should be the leader of the outreach. I think the pastor should be the one who's leading by example. If the pastor says, hey, let's go out here and let's go door to door and clean up people's yards, the pastor ought to be out there if he's physically able to do it. That's just my thought process. If I'm going to encourage people to come to Sunday school, I need to be in Sunday school teaching it or doing something to serve. That's just my heart. So I think that by actually leading by example is one of it. But yes, there has to be some actual coordinated work to outreach. And there are some things that I have on the drawing board, some things that I've brought to our deacons for them to think about, some things that I'm not quite ready to share with the church because I want them to go through the proper channels. But there's just some outreach things that I think could help us engage the community. And part of the thing I don't like about COVID, what it did was it brought us back too much into the church, and I understand why, but I think now we're going to have to get back out into the community and spend some time out there with people. I think prayer and coordinated efforts, it might take revivals, it might take youth revivals, it's going to take service work, it's going to take ministry work. And I always tell people, it's great if you can go off somewhere overseas or some other part of the country and do missions, but we've got missions to do in Bemis. And this lady right here could make us a list tomorrow of 100 things we could begin to do. So I'm going to depend on her very, very much to help me figure out how we can best do that. I don't know if I answered your question.
You actually answered my second question as well. I would like to know some ideas for specific outreach. Sorry, I got away. Love the fact you want to go about things the right way. But what is one immediate change that you would make with your authority?
One immediate change. Oh my goodness. You know how to turn the heat on a fella, don't you? I can't right off the top of my head think of an immediate thing, like a procedural thing that I would want to change. My thought process goes more to just trying to change our mentality that we look outward rather than inward. But as far as what we do in here, I don't have a pressing desire to change a lot of things within the church. I feel like this church is very receptive to new things. You know, I've brought new music to the church in my time here. Nathaniel has. I've never had anybody come and fuss at me about that. I have in other churches, I'm saying. I feel like this church is very open. I tend to be fairly conservative in the worship. I'm not quite as conservative as Dr. Sims, but I'm far more conservative than some. You're not going to see me up here on Sunday morning in blue jeans. There's nothing wrong with that. If you wear blue jeans to church on Sunday morning, that's perfectly fine. But I'm not that person. I'm not going to be your pastor in a t-shirt. That's just not who I am. But as far as just like something that I can't think off the top of my head what that would be.
I'll keep going. This is something you don't have to answer this. I understand you have your own ideas, but I would like to get some specific ministries that you would like to start implementing. And you kind of touched on this in the first question. We all know the last few years it has been a rapid decline of church attendance. Quite frankly, let's just dumb it down. Church membership.
I have a secret weapon. And she's sitting right over there, and I'm not trying to embarrass her, but my daughter and I talk about these things because I'm the old guy now. She's the young lady. And she's been exposed to a lot more young people and young people's thought processes and theology. And so some of the things that she and I sit and talk, how do we reach young adults? How do we reach 20-year-olds? How do we reach 30-year-olds? Well, one of the first things that we've done is start a young adult class just so that we actually have a place for them to go if they come. And it's not that they couldn't go to some other, but I'm very proactive. Okay, let me back up here. When I went to Pinson, their attendance had dropped considerably over the years. And one of the things that they were not doing was Sunday school for every age group. They had a median age group, which was like middle-aged and older, and then they had a senior adult group. And the thought process was, well, if somebody comes with young people, we'll get so-and-so to go in there and she'll start a class or something. And I told them at the beginning, I was like, you can't do that. You have to have the class. And if the class needs to be painted and freshened up, you've got to do that. And if you don't have material and stuff to teach, you've got to order that. And you have to have a teacher for that. And you have to be prepared for that. And if nobody shows up, you pray. You pray. And they looked at me a little weird, but they said, okay, well, we'll try it. And so we just started a young couples class. We started a youth class. We started a children's class. We had no young people. We had no children. We had no youth. But I'm going to say within a couple of years, the young couples class had about 16 or 18 people in it. And we had children, we had youth. Our Sunday school attendance went from 25 to 30 to about 75 in a couple of years' time, just because we were proactive. And I don't understand spiritually how that works, but when you purposely decide to place a class or to have something for people, God will honor that and he will bring people in there. So I'm very firmly involved in that, and I think I've gotten off track with your last question. Oh, no? Okay, good.
The thing is, how do you reach out? Listen, guys, I'm 38. One of the youngest guys here. Probably am, but, seriously, that's an issue.
Yes.
It's not everyone that's my age when we were rocking and rolling with 50 in the youth has moved off to another state somehow. Okay? And a lot of people my age have moved into this town since then. So we have to, go after the new blood, if you will. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that grew up here, that are from here, that trust this place, that love this place, that don't feel wanted by this place.
They're just not here anymore.
There you go. How do we reach out, grab them, pull them back, say, hey, we love you, brother, let's do this?
One of the things that I've already started that I would continue to do regardless of whether I'm major pastor or not, just because and let me say this, if you all decide that you want to go with somebody else, I'm not going to get mad and walk away and relieve you, okay? I want y'all to understand. I know that sounds weird. I'm not going to get mad and walk away if y'all say, no, we don't think you're the one we want. I'm not going to get mad. I'm going to keep doing what God's called me here to do. One of the things that I've already started is going through our membership. We have over 900 members. When you look at the active members, it's about 150. And so I've started with the active members and going through that to try and figure out where are all of these people. And I shared that with some of y'all on a Wednesday night a few weeks ago, letting you kind of warn you, we're going to be going through that process of trying to locate these folks. And if they're in another church and they're happy, that's great, that's fabulous, but I want to know where they are. I want to know if they're not in church somewhere. And then eventually, it sounds like a daunting task, I want to go to the whole 900. I want to see where they all are, what's going on in their lives. How to actually reach out to them is something I haven't quite gotten to, but to figure out who they are is where I'm at in that process. Did that answer that question? Okay. Okay, one back there in the back. No, I would not continue as both because I've been doing that for months, and I think I've managed it fairly well, but there's some things I can't do. And no, we would need somebody to help us. One of the things, okay, let me go back to Miles' question. What's something I would change? Well, one of the things that I want to change is to reconfigure a little bit of the salaries, okay? And so I don't require as much money as some people would, okay? I would rather us take some of that and put that elsewhere and get other people where they need to be. That is one thing I would like to see us do. With that in mind, we would still have a line item for the job that I will be vacating, and we will still have the ability to hire a full-time person if we feel that's what we need to do. I'm not going to say that's what we need to do. I'm going to leave that to the church. But if the church says we want to hire another associate pastor of whatever they feel like needs to be, I think we need a committee to work on that and decide how do we move forward with that. I don't want to just assume that whatever we did in the past is what we will do now. It may work, but it may be that we would be called to do something else. But yes, we would still have that vacancy, and we would need to find somebody who could help. Because sometimes it gets, well, Miss Mona will tell you, and Sadie can tell you, sometimes it does get a little hairy around here when there's a lot of things going on. There's only a couple of us, 3 of us or so, to help try and take care of all that. Did I answer that correctly? Kind of, sort of. Yes, we would need to find somebody else. I would not be pastor and worship leader. No, not all that. I would still consider outreach to be one of my primary objectives, even if I didn't have that as my title. Yes, sir.
What's your position on Calvinism?
I am not a Calvinist in any way, shape, form, or fashion. I have friends who are. We have very lively debates, and we love each other, and we don't get mad and slap each other upside the head. But when I was first confronted with Calvinism many years ago, it just seemed wrong to me, because it seemed that what they were telling me, and what they actually said is, it's a difficult position. You have to accept things about God that are hard to accept. And right then I said, no, there's nothing about God that is unpleasant. And the more that I've studied, and the more I have, and I actually wrote about that in my book, I don't find it to be a biblical viewpoint. I don't disrespect people who disagree with me. I just don't find it to be what the Bible teaches. Hit me hard. Yes, ma'am. You need to find a better pianist if you can. I was sitting there playing, and I was thinking about his mother, Melanie, and I thought, I could remember times when she was so confident she would just close her eyes and she'd be singing while she's playing. I was like, if I could get to that point where I could play with my eyes closed, that would be delightful. I don't know that I'll ever get there. I enjoy playing the piano, and I have said, we looked to see if we could find someone to just play piano. If you can find anybody, most of them won't commit to every Sunday night, because they just don't want to do that. And if they do, it's quite expensive just to hire them to just play the piano. And, you know, we've got Miss Jane over there. We pay her a token, but it's really not that much money. And I'm happy to do it if the Lord brings somebody else into this congregation who has that gift and wants to do it. I'll gladly give the bench up. But I don't consider it to be a stressful thing. I enjoy it. I don't mind doing it at all. I don't want people to think that somehow that's too much work for me. I enjoy it. And I've kind of enjoyed it. It's been really interesting to go from leading and to go to following and somebody else leading, but I think I've adapted that pretty well, and he's gotten pretty bold. He'll just snap his fingers at me and tell me, no, I'm kidding. I enjoy it, but it's not, if someone else was here and said, yeah, I feel led to do this, that would be great. I'd be happy with that. What else? Y'all have given me some easy questions. Well, except Miles. Miles had one good one, but the rest of them have been. Has anybody else got any? Yes, sir, Brother Butch. Well, thank you.
Because you are a teaching pastor, preacher. And I like that, and we need that. I love salvation messages. Brother Sims that was his main thrust. If I get a grant or not. But we need more than that. And you've given that to us. I want you as our pastor. I want you to know, brother, I am happy.
Well, thank you. And I meant what I said this morning, and I wasn't trying to be critical of anybody else, any of the other 49 resumes. There's probably some wonderful people in there, I'm sure of it. But things are just quite different than they used to be. There are 14 churches in our association, counting us, that do not have a pastor, and there's a reason why they can't find them. And there are a lot of folks who would love to come to a church like this, and there is a saying in the pastoral ministry of maintenance. Like if you go to a church and you're just there to maintain the status quo while you wait for God to send you somewhere else, there would be a lot of people who would look at us as a good maintenance church while they find somewhere else to go. And when I said this morning, I mean it. For me, to pastor this church that I've fallen so in love with, to me would be like not a stepping stone, but like, whoa, mountaintop experience. Like I can't even imagine how delighted I would feel. I would be happy. I'm already happy though, so I want y'all to understand that. I'm happy, and I'm going to continue to be happy regardless. I'm not holding you over a barrel and saying, you have to hire me to be your pastor or I'm out of here and you'll be looking for two people. I am not that kind of person. I'm not going to get mad and walk away from y'all if you feel like this is not the Lord's will. I don't want that, ever. I want you to feel like God brought him here and put him in front of us, and this is who we're going to have, and we're going to love him and support him and help him work through all of his little weird idiosyncrasies and stuff like that. But I love it, and I love where I'm at. It's kind of interesting that when I stepped away from Pinson, and I came here to do music, I didn't miss preaching. And my wife was surprised at that. She's like, you're going to hate not preaching. And I was like, well, I don't know. We're going to see. We're just going to trust God on this. I didn't miss it. I mean, I enjoyed going back into music and relearning some skills and stuff like that. And I just enjoyed that whole process. But I could tell when I started doing life group again that God was like kind of putting something back in me. And when he spoke and he said, you're going to be preaching again, I started pulling out old notes and study things and thinking, okay, I'm going to get into this. And I wasn't sure how that was going to be because I had not preached in 3 years when I preached that first sermon in September. And I wasn't sure how that was going to go. And I was a little bit nervous about it, as you could probably tell. But I walked out of there and I thought, you know, God, this is kind of fun to do again. I had forgotten how much I enjoy that. What I enjoy most of all is just being there for people. I like it when folks drop in and they just want to come by my office and sit down and say, hey, you know, let's chit chat about this. We have some older folks who don't get out and drive very much, but sometimes in the daytime they'll drop in and they'll come in there and sit down, and me and Miss Mona will sit there and we'll chat with them and talk to them. I kind of enjoy that family feel. I like people coming and going. There are times that I'd have to close my door to study, but I don't really like to do that because if somebody's here, I like to see them. I like to, hey, how are you doing? That's just me. I enjoy the family atmosphere most of all. I guess the preaching would be the thing I enjoy second. I know we're running a little bit long, but it's kind of an important thing. So if anybody's got any other questions for me, I know Miles has 3 more. Hit me with another one, brother.
Excellent. Okay. So character traits. I do this for a living. So character traits and character flaws. Everyone has them. Everyone should be able to self-recognize them. What is one character flaw or personality flaw that you feel that you have that might rub people the wrong way?
I have a weird sense of humor. And sometimes I say things that people take the wrong way and they get very upset with me. And I don't know that I've upset them because I thought that I was making them laugh. And I don't mean to do that. I pick at people. I think that's part of growing up in the South. I got picked on as a kid. And so I pick on folks and that's just kind of I pick on Miss Jackie. I just do this to her. I can actually mimic her voice, but I'm not going to do that in front of you. I realize that that's something that I guess everybody deals with at some point. We all find out somewhere along the way that we hurt somebody's feelings. Somehow we didn't know we were doing it. What I've always asked people in the church, if I say something or I do something that you find offensive, please come tell me, because I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I don't try to hurt people. I don't like to make people mad. I mean, I can be confrontational if it is necessary, but I'm not just automatically confrontational because I don't like confrontation. I don't like conflict. I don't like drama. I don't like people to be mad at me. I want everybody to be happy. That's it. I have that weird sense of humor, and I try to contain it. But I do realize there are times that, I'll say something and I'll say it in complete ignorance, but somebody will be offended by it. Sometimes people don't like the fact that I am kind of an open book, but I'll tell you, like I stood here tonight and tell you, there was a time in my ministry I stepped outside of God's will. He was still with me. He still took care of me, but I feel like there is another line of thought with pastors, and I've heard them say this. You have to present an image of perfection. You can't admit flaws and stuff because then that makes you look weak. I just don't agree with that because nobody's going to buy it anyway. I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect. So there's no point in me trying to fake that. And how is anybody going to relate to me if I act like I'm perfect and they're sitting there thinking, well, why are you talking to me about my sins if you're not willing to talk? I'm not going to tell you everything, okay, but I'm trying to be an open book. What else? It's got to be somebody else with a question.
Well, I don't have a question,
Yes, ma'am?
but I'm going to say something
Okay.
to you. I have never worked with a more generous, precious person, man of God, than John Gaines. He is, to me, he's the kindest, most gracious person I have ever worked with. With his music, we have had a wonderful time. It's been gracious. It's been from God, Brother John. Everything we do up here has been from God. And this man right here is God sent. He's God sent.
Well, thank you.
And I love him.
Thank you. Me and Miss Jane do. I did think of one other thing, Miles. This is kind of because of our current situation. We're short-staffed right now, so I am wearing a lot of hats. I don't mind that because that's just my work ethic. I'm going to be doing something all the time. But one of the things that I am acutely aware of the last 8 months, because I'm here before 8 o'clock in the morning because we're in here to practice, and then at 5 till 9, I'm racing down the hallway to get to Sunday school, And then at a quarter till, I'm racing back to here to get to there. And so I don't have lots of time that I would like to have to stop and spend. And so if somebody is like a visitor or they may not really understand kind of where we are as a church right now, they might see, well, he just didn't even talk to me. He just walked right by. I try really hard to not let that be an issue, but just because of right now being short-staffed, there's just a lot that I'm doing. I don't mind doing it, but that's just that's part of unfortunately, I'm a little bit busy sometimes on Sunday, and hopefully that will change when we get settled. Yes, sir.
One of the responsibilities, or can be one of the responsibilities of the pastor, is counseling for, lots of different reasons or whatever. How comfortable are you with that part of the ministry and the experience?
I'm very comfortable with it because even outside of ministry, when I worked at Pig Sweet, everybody that had a problem with somebody ended up coming and talking to me about it because they always said that I had a calming effect on them. I don't know what that means really. I don't know where that comes from, but I've just been told that I had a calming effect and people would just sometimes want to talk to me. That's something that just comes natural to me because I enjoy it. Now, there is a line at which you realize if somebody needs professional counseling, I am not a psychologist. And so there's a point at which you have to say, and Amanda knows this very well, I'm not qualified to help you with mental illness. I can help you with spiritual issues, but I'm not qualified to help you with mental illness. I think some pastors have gotten in trouble because they try to help people when it's outside their scope. I don't try to go there. But I actually enjoy doing funerals, not because I want to see people dead, okay? I don't like that aspect of it, but I like being there for the family. I like to try and find some way to comfort them and counsel them through it. I enjoy that process of it. That's an absolute given for me. I don't marry anybody without doing counseling. They don't always listen to me, but I do. Okay, who else? Okay, Miles has got one more and then we're going to go. I know you got one more. You got good questions. This will be the last one.
Okay. You get one word. Describe your philosophy.
Only one word? Can it be a phrase? I would have to just say God. I would like to say God's will, but...
I would have also accepted love.
Oh, okay. Well,
God is love.
I keep emphasizing I'm not perfect. I don't hold myself up as super spiritual or any of that, okay? But when I die, what I hope people will say is, he and God were like this. That's what I hope people will say. That's what I hope they will see in my life. I fail at times, and I know I fail. And I don't know why when I fail, God is still right there to love on me in any way. And sometimes I'm just ashamed to go to him and ask him to forgive me for something that I said or did or thought that was so dumb. But he just always is like, I feel like God's like this father, just like pat me on the head. It's like, it's okay, son, it's okay. So if I could have two words, I would say God's will. I've been talking to the Lord since I was 7 years old, and he's always talked back to me. That's why when I teach and preach that you can know the will of God, I'm not teaching it theoretically. I'm teaching it practically. I do know what God's will is in my life. It doesn't always work out because people don't always follow God's will, but I know what God wants me to do. I don't go into things thinking, well, if this works out, then I'll know it's what God wants. I don't operate that way. Some people find that black and white kind of strange, but I don't see a lot of gray area in there. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you. I've actually had the opportunity to do a lot of funerals for people I had never met before. But again, that's one of those things that God can tell you things that you need to know. And I've done other funerals before where people came up to me and said, oh, I didn't realize you knew him. And sometimes it was somebody I'd never met before. But that's the Lord. And yes, ma'am. I've never heard his audible voice, no.
How do you explain how he gets in touch with you?
I hear it in my mind. And it's often very direct. You know, I sometimes will talk to the Lord and ask him questions, and 2 or 3 days later I get an answer. Sometimes I'll ask him a question, and as soon as it comes out, boom, he gives me the answer. And I know it's him because it always is logical and it's always biblical, and sometimes it's not what I expected. So I know it's not my imagination. But no, he's very direct with me in that respect. But I haven't actually heard his audible voice. But he speaks, I guess that would mean through the Holy Spirit, into my mind very, very clearly, and very direct answers.
I know sometimes, like when I'm praying about something I've got a problem in, and I don't hear his actual voice, but then some situation will come up that is exactly what I talked with him about, and there's an experience that has been explained to me.
Yes. I would say that God speaks to us through his word. He speaks to us through prayer. The Holy Spirit can simply convict us and bring us to a conclusion that is from God. I have known people who have actually heard the voice of God. I have not. But God speaks very directly to me. I have the gift of prophecy. I don't always see the future, okay? But very few things in my life have surprised me, because my mother's death, for example, I knew 2 days beforehand that I was saying goodbye to her. I knew before I ever became on staff at First Baptist Henderson, I knew 3 years before that God was going to do that for me. I knew a year before Dr. Sims left that I was going to be preaching here. There are not a lot of things that surprised me. One exception was my heart attack. He did not give me any warning about that, and believe me, I spoke to him about it. But in the emergency room, God was right there, and he told me, no, that you're not dying. They were telling me I was dying. God spoke very clearly to me and said, no, you're not. So, yes, were you done? Did you have another? Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I'm sure you felt strong at the time about putting in your resume. How did you handle it then when you said, well, God, evidently you don't want me there now, at that time? How do you focus on something like that? Well,
I didn't analyze it a whole lot, to be quite honest with you. I mean, it could be that maybe God's timing wasn't ready, or maybe this church, maybe it just wasn't what they wanted at the time. But
reason it out, kind of just like you said, that the timing was wrong, or this church wasn't ready.
yeah, I didn't analyze it a lot. I just accepted that, okay, if God closes one door, he opens another. But I felt confident that I was still in his will regardless of what anybody else was doing. And I'm not saying this church was out of God's will. I'm just saying it just didn't come before the church. That's fine. But God found somewhere else for me to go, and I enjoyed it.
Rationalize it out and go on to the next step.
Yes, and that's why,
And then come back
And that's why I said I'm happy regardless. As long as I know that I'm listening to the Lord, then I can be happy regardless of what happens. Does that make sense? Yeah. I don't always analyze it or try to figure it out. Sometimes I'm okay to just say, okay, well, we'll just leave that to God, but I'm happy anyway.
I know you say, well, he's told me that I'm going to be preaching here, and it's going to be within a year, or you knew a year before Dr. Bill left. You know, that
That's all he told me. You're going to be preaching again. That's all he told me. He didn't tell me any specifics. But I was prepared for that.
coming through your reasoning, your mind somehow, right? Because God doesn't just verbally speak his
He didn't verbally say it to me. He spoke it to me. I very clearly heard it in my mind.
okay, but that's like when you hear it in your mind that that's not God's will right now, or that's you know, somebody else will come down and my time will be later or something.
Yeah, I'm not following you completely on that one, but I just take it one step at a time. Whatever he tells me to do, I make myself available for that as best I can.
Okay, but I was just interested in how you're
The thought process,
figuring it out,
yeah.
where you know that, just like you said, it wasn't God's will right then, this.
Yeah, I didn't really question that a whole lot. I just moved on. If that makes any sense. Okay, I saw somebody that had their hand. Yes.
Okay, in the past, this church has used the King James Bible,
Correct.
and you don't, is there a reason why?
I love the King James translation. I have lots of translations. I prefer the NIV because I have learned over the years that that's the one that people can understand the most. If I preach in the King James, the very next thing I'm going to have to do after I read the scripture is then tell you what that actually means. And that's what most pastors do. They'll preach in the King James and then they'll turn around and give it to you in modern English. I've just found that the NIV is very good about that. I study a lot of texts and a lot of translations, and I have not found one that I think is perfect in every rendering. There are some times I find something in the King James and I'm like, I don't know why they did this, chose this English word for that, because I go back and look at the original languages. So I do all my word studies. I go back to the Greek and the Hebrew, and then I move forward with that. I've just found that the NIV is the one that people can understand and relate to the most. I don't preach out of like the Living Bible, but I'm not one of these that's going to say that's a bad thing because my mother had one in the 70s and she learned and understood things by reading that. So I'm like, okay, if God can use that, I'm happy with that. But I don't feel convicted to particularly go with just the King James translation. I love it, but that's just not what I feel convicted to lead to. And I've had people in the past that just really had issues with that. But when we've discussed it and talked about it, we usually come to the realization that it shouldn't be an issue. And I'm willing to talk about that too. So that's I've studied a lot of Bible translations. Okay, one got to be the last one because everybody's ready to go home. Yes, sir.
You say you don't have a degree. Actually, I say you're probably in good company, neither did Jesus.
Well, a lot of my actual, my heroes of the faith are the guys from the 1800s and the 1900s, and almost none of them went to seminary. People think of Bellevue Baptist Church, they think of Dr. Adrian Rogers, and he was a fantastic man, don't get me wrong. But the guy that actually built Bellevue into what it became was R.G. Lee, and he never went to seminary. He never cracked a book in a seminary, but he was a brilliant man. I'm not comparing myself to him, but he was a brilliant theologian. Spurgeon, a lot of the guys that I love to read, some of them didn't get past the 8th grade. They just didn't. So, okay, we got to go because it's 7:30, and I think that the air conditioner has gone back to it. So, yes, sir.
In closing, when everybody's asked all the questions, I'd like to ask the chairman and the deacon, pray for this church family, and pray especially for you, and pray for,
Is that something you want us to do in closing?
yes, church family.
Okay. Let's do that. His suggestion is that we ask Brother Roy, the chairman of our deacons, to lead us in a prayer. Just pray for our church body. I pray for the Lord's will to be done. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. Would you want to do that for us, Brother Roy?